is still around. He is actually here today, but he's not brewing anymore. He's in his 80s. But he's still very much involved in the museum of the Goeze. So you might have seen, or you can see it later when you walk out, there is a new roof on the side of the building here. That is actually a new annex where we're going to be exhibiting some pieces for this museum. So we hope to open that within a year. He's working hard on this, cataloging items and stuff. But the brewery, the daily running of the brewery has been taken over by his son and daughters. Jean is in charge of the brewing, and the daughters are actually in charge of all the administration, the tours, things like this. So they are running the brewery, and actually the grandson, Jean's son, is also already a brewer. So we're on the next generation again, so 5 generations of the Cantillon family basically are keeping the brewery afloat. We are in a very good position right now. We produce about 250,000 liters of beer a year, and all of that is basically sold before we produce it. We cannot take on any new big clients or distribution networks or anything. It's just we are at our max. So that's a good position to be in from where he started to where it is now. People really are very interested in what we do here. So what we do here is actually producing lambic beer. That is the only beer that we brew. And from there we blend the lambic into other beers like Goeze and fruit beers, for instance. I will explain that during the brewing process. The room that we are in now is not in use today, but it might be again on Monday. It is brewing season, and they have been brewing quite a bit. So all the equipment is still in use. Just so you realize. In here, this is where we start the brewing, and we do that by making a mash. Now, how do we make beer? You all have visited breweries, so you know what the ingredients are. You can tell me that.
Water.
Water. We start with water. Malts. Yes.
Barley.
Barley is malts. Yes.
Hops,
Hops.
but not very many in Alembic.
Sorry.
I said hops, but not many in Alembic.
Oh, a lot actually.
Really?
Yes. I
Okay.
will explain this. A lot. And the last ingredient is actually yeast.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll get into the yeast as well because we use a special yeast, of course. Yeah. So let's start with the first 2 ingredients, the water and the malts. This is what we need in this room. Water is just city water. That in Brussels is extremely rich in calcium and magnesium. Great for brewing, not so great for your machine. So there's a lot of cleaning and decalcification that you need to do. But that is, it's great for brewing. What does it also mean? You still need to know the quantities of the calcium and magnesium in your beer, because if you take a recipe from Brussels and take it to Amsterdam or New York, the city water is going to be different and it's going to react differently with your ingredients. So they also need to monitor the water and make sure that the city water doesn't change too much. It shouldn't, but let's say they start putting on a calcium filter, for instance, we need to start treating our water. So this is why you always need to know as a brewer what your water contents are. So we use the city water, and we're going to be using 10,000 liters per batch. That is quite a bit. The next ingredient is the malts. Now, malt is actually basically a processed grain. Most used is barley, but you can also use wheat, which is actually what we use, barley and wheat. But you can also, as a modern day brewer, often they use oats or rye, for instance, or a lot of other grains. And they all need to be malted first. Now, what does this mean? When the grains actually come off the land, they go to a malting factory where they're going to treat the malts by actually soaking them in water and wait for them to sprout, to germinate. This happens within a few days of soaking them in water, and then you will actually see the roots coming out. Now, we do not want that new plant. We only want the change that happens when the roots come out. Now, what happens then inside the grain? It basically is making a starch, and the starch is going to give us sugar. So we always need to use a malt in beer. You can use untreated grains as well, which is what we do here, but you always need to have that sugar inside. So this is why any grain needs to go past the malting factory before you start brewing. Now, in the malting house, they don't need the plants, so once the change happens, they drain the water and they're going to dry and roast the grains. And this is how they actually make different types of malts. So for a modern day brewer, this is great because they can choose between blonde malts or amber malts or dark malts, but they also can choose a lot of variations in there. The very basic malt is very sweet, but going from there, you get taste like toasted bread or caramel or fudge even, or nutty flavors or chocolate or coffee. I remember, anybody tried a stout before? It's very rich on coffee or chocolate. That is due to this process. and not because they added coffee to the beer, generally. There is craft beer brewers that do that, of course. So that is what the malting house does. It makes new varieties of malts. The brewers use them to make different recipes. For us, we don't need all those special malts. What we use is the basic malt, very rich in sugar. We call this Pilsner malts, not just for Pilsners, but basically for any blonde beer that needs just to rely on a blonde color and on sugars. So that is the start. We use Pilsner malts. They come from Dingemans, so a malting factory here in Belgium, and we actually use wheat, unmalted wheat, in our recipe. Why do we use unmalted wheat? Because it will not give us the sugar, so it will not bring up the alcohol content, but it will actually give more body, more texture to a beer and flavor. So for our recipe, we're going to be using 1,300 kilos of grain, 850 are going to be barley, malted barley, and the rest will be unmalted wheat from Wallonia, the French-speaking parts of Belgium. So that is our recipe. Now upstairs, you will see later, there's a water heater that will actually, we will preheat the water, and then we're actually going to let it go into this mashing tun. You may stand around there because you want to have a look inside. I have seen it before, so these all circle around so that you can see it. The water is going to go in there, and then we're going to bring the grains in. Now the grains are coming in through this reservoir, and they're actually going to be put through a mill first to make them a little bit smaller, to make it easier to extract the sugars. So this is the first step. The grains go in here, and now we're going to start putting on the machine. Now this machine doesn't actually have any heating source, so we can increase the heat by adding hot water to it. So this is how we do this process, the machine. The wheels in there, they actually keep moving and they mix the grains. And while that we do that, we keep increasing the temperature. So this process of mashing takes about 4 hours, and in the 4 hours we use the 10,000 liters of water, 1,300 kilos of grain, and we get a very soft, very sweet liquid we call wort, W-O-R-T. That is what we need for the beer. So during this process that we increase the temperature, we actually aim for specific temperatures, and we're going to end at 78 degrees. 72 degrees. That's the end temperature here. In there we get long sugars and short sugars, and we do this by different resting times and temperature, and we need those both in the beer. Now short sugars are going to be very easy for the yeast to eat. It basically will eat the sugars, transform it into alcohol and CO2. This is how beer is made. But if you have long sugar, it is more difficult for the yeast. So what happens? The yeast first needs to break it down with enzymes, like train wagons, disconnect them, and then only it can start making it into alcohol. What does that do for the beer? More body, more flavor, a different beer basically. This is also something that is often done in saison beers, for instance, that they want those difficult sugars to give more texture in the beer. So that is what happens here in those 4 hours. We go up to 72 degrees, and then we are left with a very sweet liquid.
Is the wort cycling, or you're just continuing to add water, or is it?
We keep adding water, and we also cycle it. Both.
Oh, so
Yes.
it is cycling?
Yes,
But there's no heating on the cycling portion?
We just keep adding
as
hot
more hot
water.
water comes in.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Exactly. So after the 4 hours we are done. Now in there you can see a copper plate at the bottom that actually is going to allow the liquid to fall through. So we leave the grains in there and we basically filter it out. And we pump it up with these pumps up into these two tanks that are going to be the boiling tanks. So we pump up the 10,000 liters in these tanks, and we're going to be left here with the grains that we're done with. Now these grains we don't need anymore. You could, of course, in theory, still reuse them for a very, very low alcohol beer. But here we basically open up the tank, and the brewers are going to have to shovel it all out, and then it's going to be taken by a farmer, and the farmer will feed it to his cows. And these cows are very happy with that feed, not because they're going to be drunk, but also not because there's any sugars in there, but because of the fibers. It's a very good animal feed, and traditionally this has always been the destination of the spent grains. Animals still eat it and love it, but modern breweries often find other solutions for the grains. Sometimes it's used as organic compost, or biofuel, or even to make flour for very lean breads, or to make crackers for crackers and cheese. So there's a lot of solutions these days that can also give the brewery some money back for these very expensive grains. But the manual work here is a real big thing. I mean, when they have open brewing day, you can really just see them sweat. They only wear a t-shirt and the to get it all out, because there's no space here to keep all those grains after brewing. So it must be on the same day that the farmer comes. All right. Now in here we see a lot of copper pipes and a lot of belts. This is all what part of the engine. Everything is moving in here. So if we are brewing, it is a lot of noise in here. Any other questions about what we see? So these flaps, for instance, they will close to retain some of the heat when we are mashing.
And does this open up somehow